You're rolling.
All right, this is my technique for setting up an airplane when I first get in a cold, dark cockpit. First thing I want to do is I want to apply power to the aircraft, but in order to do that, I need to ensure a couple of safety items are covered. I need to verify visually that the landing gear handle is down. I come down and I verify that the flaps are up, because when I apply power to the aircraft and the hydraulics come online, I don't want somebody being hurt by flaps that are down or moving, etc. Once I've done that, I want to apply power to the aircraft. I come up to the rheostat here and I turn it to right battery. I want to check my battery voltage, minimum of 24 volts. Optimum about 26, but at least 24 volts. Once I've checked the rheostat, I'm going to take the battery switch and move it to the on position. All it takes is a push. If I inadvertently pull it out and up, I can inadvertently go to the override position. I just want to go on, so I apply pressure, it clicks into the on position. Once I've done that, I turn my rheostat to emergency battery and I verify at least 24 volts on my emergency battery. I then turn it to left battery and I verify 24 volts before turning the left battery with pressure on the switch up. Now, once that's accomplished, I'm going to see a series of lights on my overhead panel. I'm going to have a bus tie green connect light. I'm going to have a left and right main bus lights, and I'm going to have a left and right generator light, or a small house or dog house illuminated. Now, once I've done that, I don't want to do everything that I do on battery power. If I have a GPU available and plugged into the aircraft, I'm going to use that power. So my first indication that external power is connected is a blue, and it's not blue here, but it's a blue external power available light. Minimum voltage to turn that external power available light on is 4 volts. Minimum to connect when you're not doing a start is 10 volts, and the maximum is 31. Optimum voltage is 28 to 29.5. Once I check my external power with the rheostat to check the voltage, I will connect external power here with this position. It's a magnetic switch. I click it up, it will hold in position as long as the voltage on the external power is between 10 and 31 volts. Again, my optimum is 28 to 29.5. Once I have connected external power, now I'm going to get another series of lights. I'll get a left battery, bus tie connect, right battery, left gen, external power on, right gen, or V3. It's important to understand what lights should be on, because if those lights aren't on, you've probably done something wrong. Examples would be, if I decided to go override on my batteries, the indications will not be V3, but rather they'll be bus tie connect, left gen, right gen, or a Christmas tree view, as well as the external power on. If I got myself in a hurry and I didn't turn my batteries on at all, but I just reached up and I turned on external power, my indications will also be different. They'll be the exact same indications of V3, but the emergency power light here will be on as well. So it's important to understand what lights we should see, because if they're not those lights, we know we've done something wrong. Now, once I've done that and applied power to the aircraft, there's another step that I can do, and it makes logical sense to me, because this panel right here is DC electric. Everything you see is DC electric. So I can now turn my avionics switches on. By turning on my left and right avionics, I now am spinning up my AHAR system to get my ADI and my HSIs up and running. So now I have applied power. Once I've applied power, I'm going to start my technique of pre-flight. I go back left and I check emergency equipment, things like the oxygen mask, the safety, the life preservers, the crash axe, the emergency gear extension handle behind the first officer, various pieces of equipment that we have on board. I can check my documents, for example, my airworthiness and my registration documents on board the aircraft. I come back to the left here and I start with the static pressure valve. I make sure that that's forward. I check my circuit breakers to ensure they're in. I check my audio control panel. I make sure that my switches are in hot, boom, normal. Make sure the paddles are up. I might turn the speaker up at this point, because I may use the mic to get my clearance and my weather. Well, get my clearance. Weather, I'll just go over the regular radio, but I can get my clearance that way. tiller, my FDR. There are going to be some lights illuminated on the FDR. I make sure that the pusher disarm light is not illuminated. If it is, I have to call maintenance. Now, I've applied external power to the aircraft. Therefore, because the hydraulic pump switch is in auto, the main and emergency accumulator pressure should be adequate to set my parking brake. I take the parking brake handle, I pull it up, I turn it to the right, and I tap on my brakes until I get a parking brake on light. Once I've set the parking brake, I now come straight up for the parking brake, which really sits about right here, and I come up to my instrument lights. I can turn the rheostat to make sure my instrument backlighting is working. During the day, it's going to be hard to see, but at night, it's more obvious. I then go to my flood control lights. Below the glare shield are two, I think they're fluorescent tubes.
Mm-hmm.
In dim, one light is illuminated. In bright, both are illuminated. And I think in dim, you can dim it with this rheostat, and in bright, it's just full on. It's 24 volt lighting to back up your ability to see this in case of a 28 volt power loss. From there, I come upstairs, and this is my technique for running the overhead panel. These two switches need to be norm and guarded, wipers off. Digits, I can adjust my digit knob, and I can check the rheostats in the mode selector panel here on both sides to illuminate, to dim. I have the center panels. I can check to make sure the lighting in the back panel and the center panel is working. I make sure that my boot switch is off, my boot indicator switch is on, dumbest switch on the airplane. All that does is control whether these lights will come on or off when the boots are cycling. Air supply switch should be on and guarded. Great 80s band. I'm all out of love. I'm so lost without. 3 green lights, these are the manual push buttons. They're not going to do anything now because the engines aren't running. 2 guarded switches, intakes off, props off, windows off, standby pitot off, cargo switches, if installed, passenger version they will be, cargo version they will not be, off and safety wired. Cargo extinguisher light should be out. I move to the right, so that's A column. I move to the right to the B column. This is the fuel panel. Every panel is marked with what it is at the top, the prop, engine, stab and wing, engine. In this case, we're on the fuel panel. I'm going to make sure the crossfeed switch is off. I'm going to make sure that the connect valve switch is closed. I'm going to make sure that the standby pumps are auto and guarded. I come straight down to the fire handle, in, safety wired, come to the extinguisher switch, off, safety wired. Now I come downstairs and I can check my temperatures. I can check my left battery, my right battery, and my fuel temperatures to make sure they're right. I come down to my propellers. These switches at this point should be guarded. We're not going to manual feather yet. And my autocoursing switch should be off. Come straight down, and here's what comes to a technique on the position of these switches. Those are the ignition switches. I am doing an acceptance or preparatory check in order to start engines on this aircraft, right? So I may as well pre-arm those switches where I need those switches to be for my engine start. So I will unguard and off on both those switches. I will make sure that my no-bat start light is not on, which I should already know because I checked my battery temperatures here, that this is not exceeding 57 degrees, and I don't need to do anything with my start switch. My dome light may or may not have been turned on when I first entered the aircraft. This is a left hot battery bus item. My annunciator, bright and dim. If it's nighttime, I want this in dim, and if it's during the day, I want it in bright, and it will illuminate the lights either in bright or dim throughout the flight deck. Come down here. If I'm having somebody else do the walk around, I may have all my lights on so that they can verify during the walk around that those lights are operable. And when I'm done, I'm going to turn them all off except the nav light, which really never really needs to be turned off unless your specific company procedures call for it to be off. I move to the right. If you are a cargo version, you will not have these switches. These are the seatbelt, no smoking, and in some cases the sterile cockpit light. But if you do have them, you make sure at this point that they're on. Now, because we set up power in the aircraft, all of these switches have already been dealt with. I come straight up to the inverter. On the B model, you'll have one switch, left, off, right. On the A model, you're gonna have two switches, which are behind this column here. One's gonna be the main and one's gonna be the standby. I come straight up from there. I've got a fire handle and a fire extinguisher bottle that I do the same thing to those that I checked on the left. And now I come up to the test 1 panel. I, as a technique, start at the top of the column, top left. I tell the bleed leak switch and I push bleed leak to the left. When I do that, I will get a master caution, single chime, air conditioned lookup light with a bleed air leak light on the D column. As my other technique, anytime I first actuate a switch that's going to give me a master caution or a master warning, I punch that off to make sure that the switch works. Every other master caution that I run, I don't worry about that switch because I've already tested it. I go to the right, I get the same indications: master caution, single chime, bleed air leak, air condition light to the right. Now I move to the right of the bleed leak test to the stall test. In order to do the stall test, I need to disengage the gust lock. It's a switch here. You move it you pull back with back pressure. You move the switch to the left. You move forward. You release the switch. All right. Now, I'm going to do a stall test. This is what I look for in the stall test. I pull the yoke into my lap, and I take both switches and I go up with both switches. When I do that, orally I will get the shaker clacker. I will feel the shaker in the yoke. And when I go both up, I will also get the pusher with the 80 to 90 pounds of pressure pushing it forward. In addition to that, I'm gonna get a push 1, push 2 light here. And there. There. Top left and top right of the ADIs. Pull the yoke back to my lap, I take both switches, I go down. I'm going to get the exact same indications that I got with both switches up. The only difference is I won't get the pusher. I release the yoke at this point. I go left stall switch up. I'll get shaker clacker, push 1. I go left stall switch down, shaker clacker, push 1. I go up with 2, shaker clacker, push 2, down, shaker clacker, push 2, done. Reset the gust lock. I've gone to the right. Now I start on the left. I do my lamps test. I go upper lamps. When I go upper lamps, I'm going to get wig-wag lights. Left to right, left to right. Everything up here is going to wig-wag, except these lights, which are solid, these lights, which are solid. But I'm making sure that I have 2 bulbs at every single station. Once I've done that, I want to test my lower lamps. Now, I can just go lower and test everything down here, but the problem is if I do that, the autocorson lights will not illuminate it. In this case, it just says autocorson. On the B model, it'll say autocorson high, autocorson low, and in the A model, it'll say autocorson armed. Without this autocorson switch in the on position when I do a lower lamps test, those lights don't come on. So I go lower lamps, autocorson switch on. I'll get all of the lights down here illuminated, almost all. I'll explain what lights we don't get. Once I release the switch, I turn the autocorson switch off. There are 2 lights down here that I can't test. One is the lanyard handle, amber handle, and the other one, so amber handle here, and the fault light here that I'll test later during my pre-flight. Once I've tested the lamps, we don't worry about flaps. You can test it if you want. If you go up, you'll get a green light, master caution, single chime, flap suit repeat, but it's not a mandatory test. I go fuel. I go left fuel. When I do, where did your dad tell you to put your hands on the steering wheel when you learned how to drive?
10 and 2.
10 and 2. Well, we're gonna go 10 and 2. What's gonna happen is the fuel quantity and the fuel flows are gonna point at each other. Left fuel quantity, left fuel flow will point at one another. So the fuel flow is going to go to about 750. Fuel quantity is going to go to the number 10, about 1,000. I'm then going to go fuel right. Same thing repeated on the right side. Right fuel flow, right fuel quantity, they point at each other. In the real aircraft, it takes a while. In the sim, it goes really fast. I'm going to go fire short. When I go fire short, I'm going to get a left and right fire detect fail, master caution, single chime. Once I've accomplished that, I come down to the left, third column. I don't test the auto coursing switch. Auto coursing gets tested later. I check my fires. When I move the fire switch to the left, I'm going to get a fire bell, triple chime, 2 master warnings, left fire handle illuminated solid, and an engine fire tailpipe hot light. I repeat for the right. I get a fire bell, triple chime, double master warning, fire handle solid, blinking engine fire tailpipe hot. Release the switch. I now take the smoke switch. I move it to the up position. In a passenger version, I'm going to get a master warning triple chime, avionics smoke. A second later, I'll get the lav smoke, and about 2 seconds later, I'll get a cargo smoke light. I release the switch. Once I've done that, I move to my D column. I verify that my temperature control rheostats are set about where I'm going to need them. If I'm in, I don't know, Curacao, I'm going to want those at about a 2. And if I'm in Bangor, Maine, I'm going to want them at about a 6. Cold, hot. I come downstairs, I take the automatic temperature control switches at this point, and I leave them in manual. It's not marked manual, but the center of that position is manual, up is auto. I'm going to make sure that my recirc switches are off. You can burn those up on the ground if you run them on the ground, and it costs a lot of money. So, on the cargo version, there is no left recirc switch. On the non-cargo versions, there's a right recirc switch. Only on the passenger, they're both available. I come straight down from there, and I ensure that my cross valve switch is closed. Second technique, because I'm getting ready to do an engine start, I could go closed with my right and left bleed valves, but I'm about to do an engine start. So what I'll do is I'll take my bleed valve switches and I'll go reset auto on both. I'll come straight down to the HP bleed valves and I'll make sure that those are in the closed position. I'll come down to the emergency panel. I'll make sure that the ELT is armed, press dump switch is guarded, and the emergency lights are unguarded and off. I'll check my door lights, my fuel status light, my external power available light, my 4 door lights. I'll come straight down and I'll make sure my EFA switches are guarded. I'll make sure my wipers are off. Now, from there, I come down to the glare shield, and there's some things that I can do. I can push the TOS test at this point. It's going to go through a TOS test. Terrain, pull up, glide slope. It runs its test automatically. I can go to my mode selector panel. There's really nothing I want to do up here yet, but I can test these things. Decision height controls the decision height that I have on our respective bottom right corner radii. I can adjust the altitude in my decision height. This switch, intensity, controls the intensity of the ADI and the HSI. It's a 2-part switch, an inner knob and an outer knob. So you can adjust the brightness of those. Sector, I can adjust my HSI to what version I like. I personally am a Compass Rose HSI guy versus a Sector. I don't care for that one. I prefer this style. Personal technique. RA test. There's one on each side. They're independent of each other. I push RA, I will get a yellow DH, 50 feet on the radial altimeter. Test both, he gets it too. Flight director will turn my flight director off and on as long as I'm not in approach mode. In approach mode, I cannot turn my flight director off. So make sure you're in heading, nav, or something other than approach mode to turn that off. ET, phone home, that controls the clock, the elapsed time clock in your HSIs. They're independent of one another. We have data if you feel this is too much information and it just confuses you. You can remove most of the information from the HSI that may be confusing because you're not a professional pilot and you're weak. But anyway, bearing controls the bearing pointer. This just points to the ADF. Deviation, never used it. It's an FMS thing. It can give you off track. Never used it myself. Second course, I can bring up what course you have dialed in on your side. I can bring to my screen. So if I have a crossing radial and a VOR, so I can know where my final approach fix is and get to my descent if I need to. Okay? That's that. I have my nav radios now. Every one of these things has a test button. So I can test them if I want to. I can ensure that I'm in left nav because the FMS not installed here. The FMS only couples to the left nav. I make sure that there's no red flag in my altitude pre-select. Hopefully I've gotten my clearance already and I can set my cleared altitude in here. Then I come downstairs, check my standby instruments, check my flight status panel, I check my engine instruments, CWP, there's going to be a bunch of lights here. Landing gear 3 green, I come down to my flat gauge, make sure it's operable. There are actually 2 needles, a left and a right here. And then I have my trim, make sure that the needles look right in the trim knob, in the trim gauge. If that gauge fails, it's going to default with both pitches up, both rolls pointed up, and I think the yaw trim goes all the way to the left, but it may be all the way to the right. Never seen a failure, so I'll know it when I see it. Come downstairs, we have our hydraulics. First off, we have the roll handle in and safety wired. We have the pitch in and safety wired. We have the hydraulic panel here. Switch should be in auto. Anti-skid on, 5 needles in the green. Now, if you get this aircraft back from maintenance anytime, invariably, I've seen it more times than I can count, hydraulic switch is off, anti-skid is off. Now what happens is, you forget to check that, and you're just in a rush, and you start to taxi the aircraft, you're going to run out of hydraulic pressure real quick, and you're not going to have brakes or noticeable steering, and you're going to roll off into the grass. And that usually makes you very popular with your company, but not in the right way. Okay? Okay. From there, I move to the right, I move to my cabin pressure panel. We have cabin altitude, we have cabin rate, and we have cabin differential pressure. Right now, these aren't going to be doing a whole lot. They should be reading 0. Notice it says max 7.5 in manual. I come down here, I have 3 different rheostats on this gauge. It goes from -1,000 to 14,000, but our max PA is 8,000. So this part of the gauge is useless to you because we never go there, okay? So you can pretty much just forget 8,000 up, and really, for performance, you can forget anything above 5,000 fully loaded, okay? Bottom left, we're gonna set the altitude of your landing field elevation. Notice this says landing altitude. We're gonna set that now for wherever it is we're going to, and for your case, it's always gonna be 0 or like 10.
Except Colombia.
Except Colombia.
7,000.
Wow.
Yep.
So 7,000 feet in Colombia. So that's a really high PA. So we're covering, so they're going to put 7,000 here, which is really high.
Yep.
If you divert, the checklist actually has you check cabin, has you check your cabin pressure panel, in which case you would adjust the PA to where you're going, okay? Bottom right, B, barrel, controls the needle down here at the bottom. You set it approximately to what the barrel is. Top right, all the way to the left and off about a 1/4 inch to set the rate knob. You're going to see a tick mark here and a dot on the gauge. It should line up. But this programs the cabin pressurization system so that it goes on a proper schedule. Auto manual switch, we go manual back auto, and this fault light should illuminate and go out. That tells you that this system is working properly. We have a secondary pressurization control valve. We want that dialed all the way to the left. This is a corkscrew that controls a line of air that runs to the back of the airplane for the secondary pressurization control valve. Okay? Corkscrew all the way to the left to make sure it's closed. Power levers ground idle. FI stop in. Condition levers fuel cutoff. We already checked flaps up, prop sync off. Courses, I can mess here with my courses to make sure it works. I can check my heading bug. Now, we're not spoiled. We don't have one of these push the heading knob and it centers devices. That's for weak pilots, okay? We actually work on our heading knob. Okay? The other way to adjust your heading bug is down here on the autopilot ring. You can turn this left or right, and it will adjust the heading knob as well. The weather radar, normally in standby or test, we don't want to fry the people on the ground in front of us and sterilize them. Sometimes maybe we do. Sometimes maybe really it's our civic duty to do so, but we won't, okay? We move this to test. We adjust this radar to the test screen, and it will run the test screen here on the MFD. Target is used if I'm in the air and I want to be looking at something else, for example, terrain, but I also want to be warned if there's bad weather out there. I'll push the target button and I'll get a yellow T on the screen to warn me that there may be weather I need to pay attention to. Hold, if I want to hold a small swath of weather radar to check a specific storm out, because I'm not worried about the rest of this guy, but I'm worried about that guy, I can hit hold, it'll hold it right there. And then stab is radar stabilization. You want to make sure that that's in. Your gain knob, your tilt knob, I go max on gain and I go tilt about 4 to 5 degrees nose up. Autopilot, this is an autopilot transfer button. If you have a dual autopilot system in, it's going to switch between left and right with an arrow. If I push that button, that arrow will move to the right, meaning you control the autopilot with your nav inputs over there now. Okay? Paddle switches for yaw dampener and the autopilot, they're sort of independent of each other because I can turn the yaw damp on without turning the autopilot on. But to turn the autopilot on, I have to turn the yaw dampener on. Okay? Rolls, I will test my trims relative. Every once in a while I'll go full throw. Other times when I rush I may not go full throw, but I'll go left and I'll watch my needle. I'll go right, I'll watch my needle. I'll go left, I'll watch my needle. Go right, I'll watch my needle. Yaw trim will control this one. Left, right, and I want to set it about 1.5 units to the right. Standby pitch trim controls this needle. When I go up or down, I'm going to move this needle. Now, for the purposes of our testing, we want to get the needles at least 1 unit apart between left and right, main and standby. At least 1 unit further, so right now there would be 1 unit away from this one. Push the pitch reset button. Outside of 1 unit, they shouldn't sync. Now I take the switch and I get them within 1 unit of each other. I push it again, they should sync. That now syncs the elevator and allows me to use the autopilot in flight. Without pitch trim being reset and that light out, I can't use my autopilot and my work level goes up tremendously at that point. Okay? Other tests that you can do, technique-wise, your main pitch trim switches are double-sided switches. You make sure that one side of the switch doesn't activate it independently. You have to press both. The captain will override the FO, so maybe he's going nose up, you go nose down, and you can verify that you can override the first officer. From there, we come down, we can test each one of these radios. Test. When you do that, you will get a TCAS test. So I go to the traffic page, I get the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse that show up. You know, those guys, yellow, blue, red, etc., and white, they all show up here. If I have an electronic VSI, they show up here. There they are. And then I verify that my CTOT switch is off and my CTOT knob is dialed down. And once I have accomplished all of these items, I either call for the acceptance check or I pull out the acceptance check or preparatory check and verify that I've done all those things. Okay.